You're
pregnant. At 55.
The doctor said it twice, like maybe the first time hadn't landed. I was sitting on the edge of the exam table, paper crinkling under me, my hands pressed flat against my knees to stop them from shaking. Outside the window, I could hear the wheels of a medication cart squeaking down the hallway of Willowbrook Senior Residence, the same hallway I had walked 1,000 times as a resident. Not a patient here for this. I looked at Daniel. He was 28. I was 55. He worked the night shift as a nurse in the very building where I lived. And 3 months ago, everything between us had changed in ways neither of us knew how to explain to anyone. Now we were both staring at a black and white image on a screen, and neither of us could speak. "There's a heartbeat," the doctor said quietly. "Strong one, too." Daniel's hand found mine. It was trembling worse than mine. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just thought about the woman who was going to find out, my daughter, Claire, and how she was going to look at me like I had lost my mind. Before you continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment letting us know which country you're watching from. 3 months earlier, I hadn't even known Daniel's last name. I knew him as the Quiet One. The night nurse who always knocked twice before entering a room, even at 2 a.m., even when the resident inside was fast asleep and wouldn't hear it. He had a habit of humming under his breath while he checked vitals, some tune I never recognized, something from a childhood that wasn't mine. I moved into Willowbrook, not because I was old. 55 isn't old. I moved in because my husband, Robert, had died 8 months earlier, and the house we'd shared for 26 years had become a mausoleum I couldn't sleep inside anymore. My daughter thought assisted living was extreme. "Mom, you're not even 60. You don't need a nursing home." She didn't understand. It wasn't about needing care. It was about not wanting to be alone in a silence that had a shape. The shape of Robert's side of the bed, still slightly dented, no matter how many times I fluffed the pillow. Willowbrook had a small independent living wing for residents who weren't yet in need of full care. That's where they'd put me. A 1-bedroom apartment with a kitchenette, an emergency call button I never touched, and neighbors 20 and 30 years older than me who called me the young one. I hated it for the first 2 weeks. Then Daniel knocked on my door. "Wrong room," he said, glancing at his clipboard. "Sorry, I was looking for 214. You're 218? "All my life," I said. And I don't know why I said it. It wasn't even funny. But he laughed. Really laughed. The kind that surprises the person laughing. He didn't leave right away. "You don't look like you belong here," he said, and then immediately looked embarrassed, like the words had escaped before he could stop them. "Neither do you," I said. "Aren't you a little young to be pushing medication carts at midnight?" "Paying off nursing school," he said. "Night shift pays better, and it's quiet. I like quiet." I didn't think about him again that night. Not really, but the next night, I heard the cart stop outside my door, and I found myself hoping he'd knock on the wrong room again. He didn't. Not that night, but he did 3 nights later. The thing about grief is that it doesn't announce when it's leaving. It just gets quieter, day by day, until one afternoon you realize you laughed at something and didn't feel guilty about it. That's what Daniel gave me first. Not romance, not anything I would have called romance, not for months. He gave me quiet. He'd sit in the little chair by my window on his breaks, and we'd talk about nothing. Books, bad reality TV, his mother's recipe for arroz con pollo that he swore he'd never gotten right. "You remind me of someone," I told him once, not thinking. "Who?" "Me, 20 years ago, before I knew what I wanted." He tilted his head. "What did you want?" I didn't answer. I didn't know yet, myself. Claire visited every second Sunday. She'd bring her son, my grandson Mateo, who was 7 and obsessed with dinosaurs, and we'd sit in the little common room while he narrated an entire imaginary war between a T-Rex and something he called a super raptor. "You seem happier," Claire said one Sunday, watching me across the table. "I am happier." "Is it because of that nurse?" My stomach dropped. "What nurse?" "Mom." She gave me the look she'd been giving me since she was 14. "The whole staff talks. Apparently you and the night nurse have tea together 3 times a week." "It's not what you think." "I don't think anything yet," she said carefully. "Should I?" I didn't answer that either. But that night, when Daniel knocked, twice, like always, I opened the door and didn't let him step past the threshold before I said, "My daughter knows." His face changed. Something careful crossed it. "Knows what exactly?" "That we have tea," I said. "That's all she knows." "Is that all there is?" he asked. And there it was. The question neither of us had said out loud. I didn't answer with words. "I need you to understand something about that night, because it matters for everything that comes after. I was not a lonely old woman who fell for the first kind face that paid her attention. I want to say that clearly, because I know how this sounds. I had loved Robert for 26 years. I had buried him with my whole heart still attached to his. What happened with Daniel wasn't a replacement. It was something I didn't have a word for yet. He was gentle that night, and careful, the way people are when they're afraid of breaking something precious. Afterward, we lay in the dark of my little apartment, and he traced circles on my shoulder and said, "This is insane, isn't it?" "Completely," I said. "I don't care," he said. "Neither do I." But I did care. Not about him. About what came next. About what everyone would say. About Claire's face. About the other residents, who I imagined already whispering behind cracked doors. About the facility's policies, which I was fairly certain had something to say about staff and residents. I just didn't know yet how much all of that would matter. Not until the pregnancy test 3 months later turned my whole careful denial into something I could no longer control. Menopause had come for me at 52. Or so I thought. My cycles had gone erratic, then stopped altogether. Or so it seemed. My doctor had called it typical. I'd stopped thinking about birth control the way you stop thinking about umbrellas in a drought. I was wrong. Not about the drought. About the rain never coming again. The exhaustion came first. I told myself it was stress, hiding a relationship from my daughter, from the staff, from myself most days. Then the nausea. Then the day I nearly fainted in the dining hall, and Daniel, professional and terrified in equal measure, walked me to the clinic himself. "I think I know what this is," I told him in the elevator, my voice flat with disbelief. "Don't say it," he said. "Don't say it until we know." We knew 20 minutes later. Before you continue watching, make sure you've subscribed. And tell us in the comments. Could you imagine being in Daniel's position? 28 years old, in love with a woman twice his age, about to become a father in the strangest circumstances imaginable? The walk back to my apartment felt like it took an hour. Neither of us spoke. Daniel's hand kept finding mine, and then letting go, like he wasn't sure if we were allowed to hold hands in the hallway anymore. Like the pregnancy had changed the rules of what we were. "Say something," I finally told him, once we were behind my closed door. "I don't know what to say." "That's not helpful." "I'm scared," he admitted. "Not of the baby, of everything around the baby." "Welcome to the club," I said, and my voice cracked on the last word, and that was the first time I cried. He held me for a long time. Neither of us said the word keep or the word don't. We just sat with the terror of a decision neither of us was ready to make out loud. I need to go back further because there's a piece of this you don't know yet. I hadn't told Daniel about Robert's last year. Not really. Not the part that mattered. Robert and I had tried, once, very late, I was 49, he was 52, to have another child. Claire had been our only one, born when I was 23, and for decades I'd assumed that chapter of my life was permanently closed. But something shifted in Robert after his own mother passed. He wanted, desperately, one more chance at fatherhood before it became biologically impossible. We tried for a year. Nothing happened. The doctor gently suggested my body simply wasn't going to cooperate anymore, that perimenopause had likely already begun, and Robert took the news harder than I did. He grieved a child that never existed the way some men grieve real losses, quietly, and then not quietly at all, in the months before his heart gave out on a Tuesday morning while he was tying his shoes. I never told anyone how much guilt I carried from that year, how some nights I wondered if his heart had simply worn itself out from disappointment, mine included. So when the doctor said pregnant to me at 55, some cruel, coiled part of my chest whispered, "This is what Robert wanted. And he isn't here for it." I hadn't told Daniel any of that yet. I was about to. "There's something you should know," I said that night, sitting across from him at my small kitchen table, 2 untouched cups of tea between us, about why this is so complicated for me. I told him everything. Robert, the year of trying, the guilt, the grief that had followed me into this building like a shadow with its own key. Daniel listened without interrupting, which was, I would learn, one of the things he did best. "So you think," he said slowly when I finished, "that keeping this baby means you're finally getting what you and Robert wanted, and not keeping it means losing it twice." I hadn't put it into words that clearly, but yes, that was exactly it. "And what do you think?" I asked him. "I think," he said, "that this isn't about Robert. It can't be. It has to be about you, about us, about whether we want this, not whether it fixes something old." He was right, and I hated that he was right, because it meant I had to actually decide instead of letting old grief decide for me. We didn't decide that night, or the next. What we did instead was start telling people, one terrifying conversation at a time, because Willowbrook wasn't the kind of place where secrets stayed secret for long. Not with nurses gossiping in break rooms and residents with nothing better to do than watch the hallways. The facilities director, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Patterson, called Daniel into her office first. "There are policies," she told him, "about staff fraternizing with residents." "She's not a patient," Daniel said. "She lives in independent living. She's not under my care." "She's under this facility's roof," Patterson said, "and now apparently carrying your child." Daniel didn't deny it. He told me later that in that moment, denying it felt like a betrayal he couldn't stomach, of me, of the baby, of the last 3 months of his life that had meant more to him than any of the 28 years before them. He was suspended, pending review 3 days later. Before we go further, if you're still watching, I want you to imagine this. A 28-year-old man, suspended from the only job he loves, standing outside a nursing home in the rain because he's not sure if he's still allowed inside. That was Daniel, on a Thursday in March, soaked through, staring up at my window. I let him in through the side door meant for deliveries. "I'm sorry," he said, dripping onto my kitchen floor. "I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything." "You haven't ruined anything," I said. "I lost my job." "You'll get another job." "Will people ever stop looking at us like we're a scandal?" I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't, some days. Claire found out not from me, but from Mateo, who had overheard his mother on the phone with a friend, whispering about the thing with Grandma, and who then, because he was 7, and 7-year-olds keep no secrets, announced at breakfast that Grandma was having a baby with the nurse guy. Claire showed up unannounced that same afternoon. I heard her before I saw her, her heels on the hallway tile, fast and sharp, a rhythm I recognized instantly as fury. "Is it true?" she said, the second the door opened. "Claire, is it true?" "Yes." She sat down hard on my small sofa, like her legs had simply given out. For a long moment she said nothing at all. Then, "How could you not tell me?" "I was going to." "When? After the baby showed up at Thanksgiving?" "Claire, I know this is a lot." "A lot?" Her voice cracked upward. "Mom, you're 55. He's younger than my husband's little brother. Do you understand how this looks?" "I understand exactly how it looks," I said, my own voice rising now. "I've thought about nothing else for weeks. And I'm still deciding what to do." Claire went quiet at that. Something in her face shifted. Not softened, exactly, but changed. "You're actually considering keeping it." "I'm considering everything." She stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the parking lot for a long time before she spoke again. "Dad wanted another baby. Did you know that? He told me once, before he died. He said he regretted not trying harder." I felt something crack open in my chest. "I know." "Is that what this is? You trying to finish something for him?" "No," I said, and I realized, saying it out loud, that it was finally true. "This is about me, about what I want now, not what he wanted then." Claire didn't say anything for a long moment, then quietly, "I need time." She left without hugging me. It was the first time in years she'd left my apartment without one. If this story has surprised you so far, imagine what's coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the rest, because what happens between Claire and Daniel 3 weeks later changes everything. Daniel found new work at a clinic across town within 2 weeks. Lower pay, longer commute, but a job. He started coming to Willowbrook only as a visitor, always signed in at the front desk under his real name, always sitting with me in the common room in full view of anyone who wanted to stare. "Let them stare," he said, the first time I flinched at the attention. "I'm not hiding what I feel for you." "Not anymore." Weeks passed. My belly began, faintly, to change the way I moved through the world. Residents who'd known me for months started to look at me differently. Some with warmth, unexpectedly, an elderly man named Frank who'd lost his own wife decades ago, telling me, "Good for you. Life doesn't check your age before it gives you something good." And others with the cold, narrow judgment I'd braced myself for. Claire didn't call for 3 weeks. Then, on a Tuesday, she showed up again, this time with Mateo, who ran straight to me with a drawing clutched in his fist. "I made this for the baby," he announced, thrusting a crayon rendering of what appeared to be a dinosaur wearing a diaper into my hands. "Mom says I'm going to be a big cousin, or an uncle. She wasn't sure which." I looked up at Claire over his head. "Uncle," Claire said quietly. "Technically. It's your kid, my sibling. But he's 7, and great uncle confused him more." "You've been thinking about this," I said. "I've been thinking about nothing else." She sat down across from me, the way she used to as a teenager when she had something hard to say. "I talked to a therapist, about Dad, about all of it." "Claire, let me finish." She took a breath. "I was angry because I thought you were trying to replace him, replace what you two didn't get to have. But then I thought about how angry I'd be if someone told me I couldn't be happy again just because it looked strange to other people. I never expected you to understand right away." I don't fully understand it, she admitted. But I want to. And I want to be there. For the baby. For you. For the first time in weeks, I let myself cry in front of her. Not from grief, but from something that felt almost unbearably close to relief. I wish I could tell you everything got easy after that. It didn't. At 22 weeks, I started bleeding. Daniel drove me to the hospital himself, running red lights I would have scolded him for under any other circumstance, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel, both of us silent because neither of us could say the fear out loud. The ER was too bright, too loud, too full of machines that beeped in rhythms that meant nothing to me, and everything to the people reading them. A doctor I'd never met before pressed a cold wand to my stomach and stared at a screen for what felt like an hour, but was probably 90 seconds. "There's a heartbeat," she said finally. Daniel made a sound I'd never heard him make before, something between a sob and a laugh, ripped straight out of his chest. "It's a subchorionic hemorrhage," the doctor explained. "Not uncommon. We'll want to monitor you closely, but right now the baby is stable." Stable. I clung to that word for the rest of the night, the way you cling to a raft in open water. They put me on modified bed rest. Daniel moved a cot into my little apartment without asking, because he said if he had to ask, I might say no, and he wasn't willing to risk it. Willowbrook's administration, to their credit, or perhaps out of fear of liability, allowed it. Ms. Patterson herself came to check on me once, standing awkwardly in my doorway. "For what it's worth," she said, "I hope everything turns out all right for you both." It was the closest thing to an apology I ever got, and it was enough. The weeks of bed rest were the strangest, quietest, most honest weeks of my life. Daniel and I talked about everything we hadn't had time to talk about before. His childhood in a house with too many siblings and not enough money. Mine in a house where love was measured in expectations rather than affection. We talked about what kind of father he wanted to be. What kind of mother I still had it in me to be, 28 years after I'd first learned how. "I'm scared I'll be too old to keep up," I admitted one night, my hand resting on the curve of my stomach, feeling the strange, miraculous flutter of movement beneath my palm. "You won't be too old," Daniel said. "You'll just be exactly the age you are. That's not a flaw, that's just true." "And you? 28, about to be a father, dating a woman with a grown daughter older than half your co-workers?" He laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds like the plot of a soap opera." "It kind of is." "I don't care," he said, for what felt like the 100th time since that first night. I have never cared less about what something sounds like from the outside. By the time I reached 34 weeks, the bleeding had stopped entirely, and my doctor, cautiously, allowed me off bed rest. I walked the halls of Willowbrook again, slowly, my back aching in ways it never had with Claire 32 years earlier, and something strange happened. The other residents started asking after me, bringing me things. An elderly woman named Dorothy knitted a small yellow blanket and left it outside my door with a note that read, "For whoever comes next. Life finds its way, dear." I had come to this building grieving, expecting to spend my remaining years quietly fading into its beige hallways. Instead, I had become, somehow, its strangest and most talked about miracle. If you've made it this far, you already know something extraordinary is coming. But before we get there, subscribe if you haven't, and tell us, do you believe love can start over, no matter what age you are? Labor started on a Sunday night, 3 weeks earlier than expected, while Claire and Mateo were visiting for dinner. I remember very little of the actual moment it began, just a sudden, sharp tightening that made me set down my fork and go very still. "Mom?" Claire's voice, instantly alert, instantly her mother's daughter, in reverse. "I think," I said carefully, "we should call Daniel." Daniel arrived within 11 minutes, still in scrubs from a shift he'd abandoned mid-round, his supervisor's protests trailing behind him down the hospital corridor. I won't pretend labor at 55 was easy. It wasn't. Every nurse in that delivery room treated me with a kind of careful clinical concern that made clear, without saying it, that they were watching for complications a younger body wouldn't have presented. But Daniel never left my side. Not once. He held my hand through every contraction, whispered nonsense and encouragement in equal measure, and when I screamed at him at one particularly unbearable point that this was entirely his fault, he had the good sense not to argue. Claire waited outside with Mateo, who fell asleep in the waiting room chairs sometime around 2 a.m., clutching his dinosaur drawing like a talisman. At 4:47 in the morning, after 14 hours of labor that felt like 14 years, I heard a sound that broke something open in my chest that had been closed since the morning Robert didn't wake up. A baby's cry. "It's a girl," the doctor said, and placed her, small, furious, impossibly alive, on my chest. I looked down at her face, and for one long, suspended moment, the entire hallway of grief and fear and judgment and shame that had led me to this room simply disappeared. "Hi," I whispered to her. "Hi, little one." Daniel was crying openly now, his forehead pressed against mine, his hand cradling both our heads together like he could physically hold this moment in place forever. "What do we call her?" he asked. I had known the answer for weeks, though I hadn't said it out loud. "Robin," I said, "after her grandfather, the one who wanted her before either of us knew she was coming." Claire came in 20 minutes later, Mateo rubbing sleep from his eyes beside her. She stopped in the doorway, staring at the small bundle in my arms, and I watched 32 years of complicated history cross her face in the space of a single breath. "She's beautiful," Claire whispered. "Do you want to hold her?" Claire crossed the room slowly, like she was approaching something sacred, and took her half-sister into her arms for the first time. "Hi, Robin," she said softly, and something in her voice cracked with a tenderness I hadn't expected. "I'm your big sister. That's a weird sentence, but I mean it with my whole heart." Mateo peered over her shoulder. "Is she gonna like dinosaurs?" "We'll find out," I said. People still ask me, sometimes, if I regret any of it. The scandal, the suspension, the looks in the hallway. The year Claire and I spent slowly rebuilding trust I hadn't realized was so fragile. I tell them the truth. I regret none of it. I moved into Willowbrook believing my life was something to be waited out. I found, instead, a 28-year-old night nurse with a habit of humming and a knock that always came twice, and together we built something no one, including us, believed was possible. Robin is 2 years old now. She has Daniel's eyes, and according to Dorothy, my stubbornness. Claire visits every Sunday, and Mateo has appointed himself official chief dinosaur educator to his little sister, a title he takes with tremendous seriousness. Daniel got his old job back, eventually. Ms. Patterson herself signed off on it, on the condition, she said dryly, that he doesn't get any of my other residents pregnant. We laugh about that now. We didn't at the time. I still live in that same small apartment at Willowbrook, though these days it's less a place of quiet grief and more a place that smells on Sunday mornings, like pancakes and crayons and a life I never expected to be given twice. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life doesn't ask your age before deciding to surprise you. You just have to be brave enough to let it in when it does.